Good morning, everyone. Welcome. I know we're going to have some people still coming in, but we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to Knowledge Building for Leaders, supporting fluency. If you're in Atlanta, it's a rainy day, so thank you for joining us. And if you're coming from outside the perimeter or even outside the state, thank you for being here and taking the time to learn how to support reading fluency. So, Toby, you can go to the next slide. If you are new to Cox Campus, we are the Rollins Center of Language and Literacy, Cox Campus. It's easy to create a membership. You just go to this website, coxcampus.org. Signing up is free. Every course, every resource you'll take is always free on the website and is there for you. So be sure if you don't have a membership that you can create one today. If you're new to us, just so that you can get to know Cox Campus a little bit, these are our core values and what we'll lean on as we're in this learning session. So we've worked to make sure that this can be a rewarding experience for you and that the things you experience on Cox Campus are rewarding. It's empowering so that you can feel empowered with knowledge so that you can translate that to your context. We hope that you feel connected so that you're connected in this universal mission of impacting children's lives through literacy. And so we hope that you'll feel connected in this session. Of course, we hope that this is a safe learning environment. We hope you engage in new learning experiences. Please ask questions during the session. We have our amazing chat monitor, Corey Gaskins. You'll see her in the chat. If we don't see your question, we may be, presenting on the screen. Corey is moving and grooving in that chat. So please ask the questions. Don't be scared. This is where we hope you can learn. And then, of course, essentials. So every experience, course, resource, this presentation, it's rooted in evidence-based practices and research around the science of reading. So we want to deliver that essential knowledge again so that you can make it translate in your own school buildings, in your own classrooms. All right, and so these are who's presenting today. So hi, my name's Rebecca Loera. I work at the Rollins Center of Language and Literacy, and I work as a K through third grade science of reading professional development coach.
Good morning, I'm Sarah Diffley. I also work at the Rollins Center for Language and Literacy with Rebecca as a K through third science of reading professional development coach.
Hi, everybody. I'm Amy Dainty. I'm the Director of Literacy at the Georgia Department of Education, and so glad to see so many of you on here today as we learn about reading fluency.
So we want to make sure that we get to know you. So as you log in, make sure that your name has your first and last name, because that'll be how we're sure that you get your certificate. So we need your first and last name. And then you can also rename yourself if you want to include your district, the state you're in. Again, we may have some out-of-state people, so please put on if you're coming from out of state and where you're coming from. So this is just for us to get to know who's in the room, as y'all can make sure your names are correct and then add where you're coming from. And Toki has also released a poll. So you can also answer that poll so we can see y'all's background knowledge. Okay, I'm seeing the numbers come in. We have a good mix of people. That's great. Awesome. Hello, friends. Hello, Thomasville. I'm in Thomasville often. That's one of the districts I have been working alongside is Thomas County. But hello, Thomasville. Savannah. Hey, Sharonda. Okay, so we have a good mix of people. We have some that have been here before at Knowledge Building for Leaders. So welcome back to our new people. Welcome. We have a good mix of roles. So district leaders, admins, coaches, and teachers. Awesome. All right. So as we get started, thank you for helping us to get to know you a little bit better. So we'll start with the connection activity. So this is what we like to call "Who do you stand for?" So there's this quote by Simon Sinek. He says, "Stand for people, not a product or a service or a metric or a number. If we stand for real, living, breathing people, we will change the world." So I want you to take a minute to reflect. You can type in the chat, you can come off of mute. Who do you stand for? So your sentence stem can be, I stand for, blank, who. Who is it that keeps you grounded in doing this transformative work for our students, even when things get tough? What month are we in? It's almost the end of March. It's that time of year. Some of us have had spring break. Some of us are like pining, like spring break is so close yet out of reach. So even in times like this, where the end of the year can feel so exhausting, who is it that you stand for? Who is it that you think of that reminds you to keep going? So it can be a person or it can be a group of people. And someone could read off the chat because I can't see it.
Sure. We're seeing children who are learning, all children. We're seeing underserved in those who are underserved in our educational systems, students and teachers, public education, and the teachers and students who serve them. So someone who reflected a little bit after their initial thought said, standing for the teachers who ultimately impact the children.
I love that. There's a quote by Jodi Carrington. It's a book called Kids These Days. Mm-hmm. And she says, how do we hold the adults that hold our children? And so that's something to think about, especially in this work. How are we holding the people that are holding our children?
Especially as these are leaders.
Powerful book, Rebecca, that Kids These Days. It's powerful. If y'all hadn't seen that one, take a look.
What was it called again?
Kids These Days.
By Jodi Carrington. She's a children's psychologist, but she does a lot of work in schools. So she talks a lot about, standing for teachers. Yes. Awesome. Yeah, all learners. I love the adults and children, especially in this work where sometimes, especially as adults, you have to unlearn. And that's kind of the hardest part is the unlearning and the deconstructing. Awesome. So hopefully this engaged that core value too of we're all connected. We're all in this together and learning how best we can move forward in this work. Awesome. Thanks, y'all, for doing that connection.
So we always like to just revisit our purpose for being here together. And so one of our purposes is just the opportunity to learn together. Several years ago, back in 2023, Georgia passed some legislation, the Georgia Early Literacy Act, and it required all of us to come together more often and to learn together. And I think probably one of the most important parts of this work that we've engaged in with the Rollins Center is just the ability to engage as a network. And so if this is your first time being on one of our knowledge building series, you're going to find that there's opportunity today to engage with each other by coming off of mute, by engaging in the chat. And I think it's so important to just be able to have people throughout our state that we can reach out to and be thought partners with. And the Rollins Center has been a great thought partner for us at the Department of Education. And I hope that you'll find some thought partners and a great network to engage with today. And these programs also just help us to prepare for change. And I feel like that we are already in that implementation phase of the process, but there's change along every place and we can always learn more. The science of reading is ever changing. We're always learning more. And that's one of the best things about our partnership with the Rollins Center is that we can always be sure that we are getting the most up-to-date information. And so just welcome y'all and thank you for being here today. Oh.
So here.
No,
go ahead, Amy.
Okay, sorry. I wasn't sure if it was my turn or somebody else. So today we're going to be talking all about fluency, reading fluency. And we're going to start out by deconstructing our beliefs around fluency. We'll spend some time doing knowledge building and really exploring reading fluency. You're going to leave today knowing about lots of excellent resources that are available to you, and we'll end our time with some reflection.
So if you've been with us before, you know that we always start off by grounding our work in the research and with the theoretical models. So we're going to start there today with fluency. And we're going to start by looking at the simple view of reading. So according to the simple view of reading, we know that decoding times language comprehension equals reading comprehension. We know that decoding is the process of using letters and letter sound knowledge to read words. It requires explicit instruction to develop phonemic awareness skills and phonics skills. And we know that if students can decode that, then they can crack the code of written language and read the words on a page. And then we know that language comprehension is the ability to derive meaning from spoken words when they are part of sentences or other discourse. And so we want to keep in mind that fluency is the intersection of decoding and comprehension. Where those two pieces start to come together is where we're going to see fluent readers. So the same thing, thinking about Scarborough's reading rope, we know that it's a graphic representation of the complex nature of reading, where it depicts the interwoven relationship between language and word recognition and indicates how the various components are tied together. So when children are young, oral language drives reading and writing, but in later development, reading drives the oral language. So true reading fluency happens where language comprehension and word reading intersect, where those two ropes start to intertwine together. So we want to really take notice that fluency is not its own strand on the rope. If you look at the strands, there is not one labeled fluency. So we want to make sure and be really cautious that we aren't isolating fluency during instruction, that it's interwoven with other things. So as an adult, think about how it might sound if you're reading a research article on quantum physics. What would that sound like as you're reading it? Something that you're not as familiar with, you maybe don't know the vocabulary as well, words that you're not encountering regularly. And then think about what it would sound like for you to read an article on pedagogy or education. You're familiar with those terms. It's something you're familiar with in general. So your reading is going to sound more fluent because your background knowledge and your understanding is much more robust. So we want to make sure that we're keeping that in mind as we're working with students to secure or build up their reading fluency. And then this bridge is just another way for us to visually see this represented, or to see this represented visually. So if you watch the course, you might remember that fluency was described as the bridge between decoding and comprehension. It's a reciprocal relationship. So tying it back to Scarborough's reading rope, again, another visual that just shows or illustrates how word recognition and comprehension come together, and that fluency is the bridge between those two strands. So thinking about knowing the syntax, the grammar, the vocabulary, but also the phasing and prosody, like we have to have all those things, the knowledge around the syntax, the grammar, and the vocabulary in order to have our phrasing and our prosody correct while we're reading. So if you've been around or if you attended our last training, this should be familiar, but the 4-part processor and the reading brain. And again, just reaffirming that the fluency is the culminating product of all the component parts of the reading brain. So only when our circuit is connected and flowing automatically can more attention be put towards the fluency processes. So we have to have all of these things solid in order to move forward with fluency. So as we think about systems and structures, and we put this at the beginning this time, we typically have had it at the end, but we thought this was really important for you to have in mind as we move through our time together today. So as we think about systems and structures that need to be in place at the district or at the building level, it's imperative that we have solid processes for gathering data and then analyzing the data to determine exactly what students need. So often we encounter buildings or districts that have a screener in place and it's given to every student and it identifies the students that are performing on, above, or maybe even below grade level, but it often stops there. And so, in order to effectively support reading fluency, we need to have other measures in place. We can start with an oral reading fluency assessment, which we'll talk more about in a minute. And then if students score on or above on the ORF or the oral reading fluency assessment, we can look at comprehension measures. And so, but if students score below on the comprehension measures with the ORF, we want to look at an oral language survey to gather more data about their language skills. But if oral reading fluency is below grade level, we might want to administer a phonics diagnostic. So we've started our time together by learning that fluency is the culmination of word decoding and comprehension. But if students are below in these areas, we have to address the below area first in order to know what instruction students need to support their fluency. So if students don't have decoding skills, using a fluency passage that they aren't able to get the words off of the page isn't helpful. We need to think of fluency like a fever, that it's a symptom, and we need to determine that underlying issue.
Thanks, Sarah, for grounding us in the research. So something we keep repeating is that fluency is a culmination of all these processes. But what is fluency? What is fluent reading? So we're going to dive into building that knowledge together. First, just a quick analogy. So I want you to picture it. You can go to the next slide, Toki. I want you just to picture you're however old, you're 16, whatever age you got your learner's permit, your driver's license. What are all the things you have to be aware of when you are getting ready to drive in a car? And I said picture yourself 16 because I want you to think about what were all of the things, the steps you were having to remind yourself to do so that you wouldn't feel like a chicken with your head cut off your first time getting behind the wheel. So go ahead, post in the chat. What are some things and the steps you have to remember as you're getting ready to drive? What are each step that takes place in order to make that happen?
I'll read them as they come in.
Thanks, Corey.
Those crazy mirrors.
Right? When it's your first time behind a wheel, it's like, oh, where do I look? That's true.
Turn the car on, put your seatbelt on. Which one is gas? Which one is the brake? Oncoming traffic, people behind me. When do I use my blinkers? How do I put it in gear? Maybe what gear do I put it in? Watching for other drivers.
Oh, yeah. So many things. And if you have you learned driving stick shift, bless you. That would have been stressful. There's a lot more steps to that too, right? Toki, go ahead, show the answers. Y'all got a lot of them, right? Even something as simple as turn the car on. Nowadays, it's you push a button, if you have the newer car. So it's a little bit more simple. But even like hands at 10 and 2, where is 10 and 2? Checking your side. I think someone had said, which is gas, which is brake, and then not flooring it on gas. Because if you have a heavy foot, or like Toyota cars are like really sensitive. My first car was a Toyota. And so I felt like I had to press it with my toe because I was so scared of hitting a car in front of me. But right, there's so many steps and we are inundated, right, with the things to remember. But compare yourself to when you first learned to drive to now. I mean, nowadays it's like, you just get somewhere and you're like, how did I get here? I don't remember looking at the road or driving because that's how natural that experience has become. So I want to take that analogy and I want to compare it to learning to read. So I want us to think about, post in the chat. We went through every single minuscule step in how to drive a car. Now think of that with reading. What are each step, each skill you have to do in order to not just read accurately, but comprehend a text? So go ahead, post in the chat.
Decode unknown words, know sounds in words. What letter is this? What sound does it make? How should these letters blend together? Um, Phoneme graphing matching.
Mhm. So even decoding unknown words, like, well, what does that mean? What steps do you have to do to decode? So we heard letter sounds, even alphabet knowledge with that.
Background knowledge.
Yeah. So there's that other piece of that
Mhm.
reading rope, simple view, decoding, but also those language strands, right? Background
Mhm.
knowledge.
Mechanics of like capitalization, punctuation. How does that influence how I read it?
Mhm.
Vocabulary understanding, knowing that the goal is the meaning and not just getting through the words.
Yep. Goal is meaning comprehension building. Toki, you can show all the things. Yeah, y'all got a lot of them. Other things too, self-monitoring. So that doesn't sound like a word that I know. Like, let me try flexing the vowel sound. So knowing all my different sounds and knowing when I need to adjust how I'm reading. This word could mean this, but in this context and in this sentence, it may mean this, especially with figurative language. Goodness. Heart parts, so those irregular words. Quotation marks. This means indicates that someone is talking. This is dialogue, right? So similar to driving, fluent reading is that synthesis of all of these skills, right? It's multifaceted. It's translating letters to sound. It's starting to recognize them as wholes. How are we accessing lexical representations? What does it mean? How does it connect between this sentence to this sentence? What is the summary of this whole paragraph, right? What began as this new and unfamiliar process can turn into a thrill and excitement once you're able to do it independently. But we know for our beginning readers, that's not a natural process. So like Sarah had said, fluency or lack of fluency, we need to treat it like a symptom and we need to dig deeper. What in the process is breaking down? And so that's what we're going to explore today. So, talking about disfluent reading, we have to remember something called the Matthew effect, which is the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. So, when you have disfluent reading or poor reading fluency, we know that's going to lead to decreased comprehension. If you can't decode or understand what a story is saying, you're not going to be able to keep up with grade level expectations. You're going to keep feeling like you're chasing trying to access this text. And then, of course, if you don't feel good at something, if you don't feel successful, you're going to have a decreased interest in reading. You're going to want to read less. But then when you read less, you're not exposed to as much text. There's decreased vocabulary growth, decreased motivation. I'm not wanting to access text. So, that's going to affect me being able to understand. And obviously, low achievement and growth. It's just this perpetual cycle that is each step is affecting one another. So we understand the importance of fluency and why we need students to be fluent readers. And so as we're going through this session, hopefully you'll learn, well, what is the steps to increase fluency? Because we don't want this cycle to keep continuing for a lot of our students. So just as driving with an experienced driver, you can relax, you can enjoy a smooth ride. Fluent reading, we want it to be smooth too. Fluent reading should sound like speech, and that's from Stalin Kuhn. The brain is wired for speech, right? And so when words are spoken really fast or when they're spoken super slow, it can be difficult to follow. So because our brains are wired to understand spoken language, we want reading to mimic that similar cadence. And that's going to make it more possible for our brains to process what we're reading. So what are the different components of fluency? There's three different parts. We have accuracy plus rate plus prosody. Those three things come together to equate fluent reading. Now, notice I didn't say that fluency is reading really fast or fluency is all about the speed. No, it's the sum of these three things. These are measurable and these are observable. So as we're going through this presentation, we're going to go through and dive into each of these three, how we can measure and understand the three of these things, because we know that fluency cannot be built in isolation. So let's get a little bit more specific. So we said accuracy, rate, prosody. Jan Hasbrook and Deborah Glazier define it as reasonably accurate reading at an appropriate rate, with suitable expression. That's going to lead to accurate and deep comprehension and the motivation to read. So now we're getting even more specific with these qualifying terms, and we're going to keep referring back to these wording throughout our presentation.
So Rebecca set us up by identifying what the three components of fluency are. And as she mentioned, we're going to get into each of those components and define them a little bit further, because I'll put myself out there. When I was in the classroom teaching, like I really thought that fluency was more about how quickly my students were able to read or call words out. And so this has just been a really interesting learning experience for myself. And I hope that you guys will find it interesting as well. So we're going to start by looking at accuracy. And so looking at that definition where we defined it a little bit further, like Rebecca said, accuracy is the ability to recognize and decode words correctly. But in that definition, it says reasonably accurate reading. So let's talk a little bit more about what reasonable means. So I'm going to give you a minute to look at this paragraph and to read it. The blank words represent words that were read incorrectly. And then the words that you can see are words that would have been read correctly. So now that you've had time to read, would love for you to put in the chat or come off mute and share, what do you think is the percentage of accuracy represented?
There's an 85, 80, 80, a couple of 80s.
So you guys are really good at quick math. This does represent 80% accuracy. And so if you either are like me and have a special ed background, or maybe you even worked with kids who have IEPs, you might recall, or this might be common practice, that we often write their IEP goals to be mastery at 80%. And so thinking about that and thinking about your experience reading this paragraph, how many people would be able to answer comprehension questions, retell what they just read, take a test and feel good about it at 80% accuracy? And I'm just going to guess that likely it's going to be nobody or very few people who feel comfortable retelling what they read at 80% accuracy. So let's bump it up a little bit. So the words in red are now words that represent words that you didn't read accurately before, but now are read accurately. So reading it with these words, let's see if that helps us feel more confident in the comprehension. So I'd love to see you there's a reaction button at the bottom. You can give a little thumbs up. So if you feel good about this accuracy level and that you'd be able to retell what you just read, I'd love to see a little like thumbs up. All right, so we're at 90% accuracy and I didn't see any thumbs up come up. So I feel like we're still not feeling good about being able to retell it 90%. So let's bump it up a little bit more. So the blue words are the words that we just added for accuracy. And so this represents 94% accuracy.
Jessica put in the chat, I feel more confident, but not feeling good.
At least we have a gist or a better understanding of what the paragraph is about now. So now that we're at 94%, how are we feeling? I see that Rebecca added, she said, this is okay. Tim Shanahan makes a case for 90% accuracy as a stretch goal so that we don't limit kids. And I would agree that most of you are probably feeling like at this 94% that you could answer some comprehension questions. You might be able to retell, but there's still a lot of information missing. And so if we go to the next opportunity, this is 98% accuracy, and I won't have you read this over again and again. But at 98% accuracy, you can see the words that we're missing. So mother-in-law, mantra, attuned. So we're continuing to add words that also have high value meaning. And then going to the last one, which would be 100% accuracy, it fills in those last two words for us. So made for Gnome's kitchen describes the kitchen. It gives us better understanding about the space that we're in. And then I went to bed nicheless. So when you could only read 80% accuracy, people were not feeling good about the comprehension. But as we went up, we started to get notes in the chat just about people feeling better about answering or retelling. So this example just really underscores the importance of reading words accurately in order to gain meaning from what is read. So this activity is just one that helps us as adults see the importance of phonics instruction as we're helping students learn to read words accurately and automatically. So when we think about how the student is reading, we want to consider age at the instructional level. So first grade requires higher access, 95% or above, and second and third grade at least 90%. And that's according to Jan Hasbrook. Some students might never be completely fluent on an oral reading fluency assessment. So there's little evidence to suggest that assigning kids to their instructional reading level will promote their reading growth. And in fact, for older struggling readers, evidence suggests just the opposite. So exposing older struggling readers to a sole diet of texts that are written well below their grade level puts them at a really great disadvantage since they get even fewer opportunities to learn grade level content. So we want to make sure that we're exposing students to high level language because the language engine is what's going to drive the comprehension. And so also, I think something to clarify, which I think we talk about just in a few slides down, is that when we are talking about the instructional level, we're not referring to like Fontes and Pinnell Bass levels with instructional and I can't remember what they're called anymore, but we're talking about like a true instructional level for the student to be able to be successful.
So why does accuracy matter? So this is just a graphic representing in 2018, the NAEP National Assessment for Educational Progress. They conducted an oral reading fluency study that examined the correlation between oral reading fluency and foundational skills. What they found was that when reading grade level text, what you kind of see at the bottom, that's the NAEP measures of reading comprehension. So we just had the newest results come out in 2024, but students that scored below basic, below basic medium, below basic high, and then what you see in the bars and those numbers in that middle, that was the percent accuracy. So what we find is that when students read grade level text, if they're not reading 95 to 98% accurate, then they're not going to perform well on measures of comprehension. They won't perform independently, which was really eye-opening to me was even with 92% to 94% accuracy, which is instructional level, students were only able to score below basic on a measure of comprehension. And then we have 82, our frustration level, because it's below 90%. So just like Sarah was saying, think about how that impacts students who only ever see texts that are below grade level. You can go to the next slide, Toki. So thinking about, texts that are below grade level, assigning children levels, right? We put a lot of faith in kind of that arbitrary measure when using leveled text. It can be hard to see flaws in a leveling system when they're packaged really well. It seems like we can communicate like, oh, yes, my child is on level E, my child's on level C. But that really oversimplifies what we've been talking about, that reading is a complex process and fluency is multifaceted, right? There's little evidence to suggest that assigning kids to their instructional reading level is going to promote their reading growth. Really, for older struggling readers, evidence says the opposite. And also, those leveled readers, if think about if a child stays at a level C and then they just stay there for months, for years, some of them, if that is all they're getting in their diet, we are perpetuating that Matthew effect, right? The rich will get richer and the poor will get poorer. There's fewer opportunities to learn grade level text. So, a quote that we always refer to is by Alfred Tatum: leveled texts lead to leveled lives. So, we want to make sure that the assessments that we use and the how we are targeting the specific skill, that's going to be what impacts fluency and accuracy the most. And so, one assessment is the ORF. And probably everyone's familiar with this. So just to make sure we're all speaking the same language, the ORF is a measure of oral reading fluency that combines accuracy and rate. And so this is an indicator of automaticity. Accuracy and rate are the heart of fluency. That automaticity is the heart of fluency. But something remember what Sarah said, ORF is only a temperature check. So if a student scores low in an ORF, that doesn't mean let's work on fluency even more. Well, like what part of fluency do we need to work well on? So an ORF doesn't specify the exact issue at hand. So we got to make sure this is a first step, but then what comes afterward. Another assessment that we all may be familiar with is the RAN, rapid automatic naming. So that's the ability to process and retrieve language-related information by quickly naming visual information or symbols. So if a student is struggling to rapidly retrieve language associations with symbols, they're likely to struggle with word level reading. But something to know is that RAN cannot be improved with instruction. So it's an indicator, it's a temperature check, or check engine light. So we can strengthen in our instructional practices in these other ways. Are we implementing explicit phonemic awareness? Do I have an explicit routine to develop orthographic mapping processes with my letter sound relationships? So thinking of these as temperature checks in the first check of a symptom, the screener, before we do our diagnostic, so we can get down to the bottom of what a breakdown could be. So really, we've been talking about accuracy. This is a quick check for you. You have an oral reading fluency passage right in front of you. We want to see if you can calculate the correct accuracy percentage. And then after we calculate that, we want you to determine, does this place a student at an independent level, instructional level, or frustration level? So we're only going to do that first paragraph. Where the red line is where the time stopped. So you can see the words that the student miscued. Those are indicated by a slash. The T means the teacher had to tell the word. And then over empty, the student said enter and kept going. So we'll give you a minute to look at the errors and analyze and come up with the accuracy percentage. And then you can just post them in the chat. The 89%. Yep. That's how you know you got it right, when other people are saying the same answer too, right? Yes, correct. So let's go through this together. All right, so we gave you the formula. They got 42 words out of 47 read correctly times 100, 89%. Yep, that puts this child at frustration level. And again, like Sarah was saying, that's just very eye-opening that often for goals we'll say 80% accurate, but knowing that 89% is still frustration for students. And just like you experienced, it can lead to breakdown in comprehension. So, something to remember, I loved this. Jan Hasbrook, she always has her hand up. And so you can do this behind your screen too. I won't make you come off mute for this. But she always says, puts 5 fingers up, and she'll say, accuracy is first, foremost, forever the foundation of fluency. She gets real excited about accuracy, and I love it. So, accuracy is that first thing that's developed when thinking about fluency, right? It's the foundation. And if we have a shaken foundation, everything built on it is going to be shaky as well. So, we want to think about looking at our fluency ramp from Dylan in 2017. We have to start with accuracy. We don't want to get stuck in accuracy land, and we're going to talk about that later, but it's going to be that intentional, meaningful, repetitive, interleaved practice that's going to get us trucking along. And not just thinking about accuracy, like, okay, so read more fluency passages. No, we have to think about accuracy at the sound and letter level, accuracy and fluency at the word level, the phrase level. How are we building up students and not just going from letters and words to all of a sudden a decodable passage, right? We want to be intentional in how we build fluency and knowing that accuracy is the foundation, accuracy is not the end goal. So also, I just want to reiterate really quick, that's why we don't need an isolated fluency block, because we're working towards fluency by addressing these other components.
Rebecca, there's a quick question, I think, about the calculations that you did before. If a student skips a line, do you count those words wrong? Like if a student's going on the first line and then they skip a line altogether, do you go slash, 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 or and then pick up, or how would you address that?
What do you think, Amy? Because I see you thinking too. I saw you wanted to say something.
I think that that's one of those things that, afterwards you would want to point that out to the child, make sure that the child has like some strategies, because, if they were reading on their own, that would be a big hole in what they were learning. But I think if you were just doing like a fluency screening, I probably would take that into account and go with that. Or, you could always just pull another little passage and let them try again. I think that when we're thinking about like in real life with real kids, teachers have to make, I don't know, I read somewhere 1 million decisions a day. I don't know, that's not the right number, but so many decisions. But you want to, you always want to think about what your goal is for the screening or the probe, and I think make decisions from there. Now that's the world according to Amy, and that $5 will buy you some coffee.
I do think it's like, well, what is the purpose of what you're assessing? If it is accuracy, just give them another passage and see. It is a data point. Like, is it a pattern of them doing that? That's what I would want to be looking for.
Yeah, I think depending on the situation too, and usually assessments will provide guidance around this specific situation, but even just like calling it to the student's attention and being like, oh, like you skipped it, and have them go back up. Because if a teacher is giving the assessment, they're going to know their students hopefully well enough to know if this is a common thing that's happening, or it's like the student just maybe got a little anxious because it was an assessment and just needed that quick redirection to go back up to the skipped line. Because we know even as adults, sometimes we can do that. So
good question.
All right, so we've talked a lot about accuracy, and we're going to talk about rate. And so I think, again, I said this for myself, but I do believe that this is where a lot of people live in fluency, of thinking about the rate or the speed at which students are reading. And so we want to think about, is faster always better? Is slower always better? And so we have some examples to hear text that's read at a fast rate versus a slow rate.
Strange Bedfellows is the title of a recent letter to the Museum News, in which a certain Harriet Sherman excoriated the National Gallery of Art in Washington for handling the tickets of the much ballyhooed Van Gogh's exhibit. A huge proportion of the 2,000 free tickets were snatched up by the opportunists in the dead of winter, who then scalped those tickets at the $85 apiece to less hardy connoisseurs. Yet Sherman's bedfellows are far from strange art, despite its religious and magical origins very soon became a commercial venture.
Sarah said, somebody said, I thought something was wrong with my computer.
No, that was just the wonderful Corey who recorded those for us. um, but yeah, it just is super eye-opening. I was actually in a classroom last week where a student was reading like the first rate. And all I could think was, could that student tell me anything about what they read? But as an older student, it was an eighth grader, they were so focused on being able to get through so much of the passage within their minute. And not really reading for the understanding of the passage. And so I think this is just a really good thing for us to keep in mind as we talk about and work through fluency of like, are we pushing our students to read so fast that they don't gain meaning from what they're reading? But then also, like, we don't want them to read so slow that they lose the meaning because there's that happy medium in between, right? Like, we listened to that slow one and I was getting distracted in between each word because it was just so slow. Um, so think about it. I used the example earlier of some science term, but like think about reading about like neuroscience or things that we are not familiar with and what your reading is going to sound like. It's likely going to sound like that slower pace versus reading something that you're more familiar with that you could even read at that quick pace. And so it's just like driving a car. Like if I'm going somewhere that I go every single day, I can drive on autopilot and often get there and not even really know how I got there. Versus if I'm going somewhere new, I really have to pay attention to the directions. I'm likely going to drive a little bit slower because I don't want to miss a turn, especially in Atlanta. So just thinking about how this relates to other areas of our life as well. And so we want to make sure that we're really supporting students to read at an appropriate rate, not to speed read, not to like snail read, but what is an appropriate rate for them to be able to gain meaning from what they're reading.
Sarah, I just had like a connection to that. So I drive across the state very often, and so I listen to a lot of audiobooks. And there are some audiobooks that I can speed up the rate of the reader to like I have learned that I really can't go much beyond a 1.2 to have understanding. But it kind of depends on what I'm reading. If it's like really light reading, then I can listen to it at a faster rate. But if it's something that I really have to think about, I have to slow it down. And so I think as adults, that's something that we can probably consider when we're thinking about the rate and how important an appropriate rate is for students.
Yes, I love that you made that connection because I'm the exact same way. And 1.2 is also about where I max out, but it does depend on what I'm listening to. And so I love that you were able to connect that because I had not connected that. So let's look at what an appropriate rate might be for grade levels. So you can see there's a chart here by Hasbrook and Tyndall by grade level, and then it gives what the words correct per minute would be, and then the percentiles on the left column. And so we'll look at this zoomed in a little bit. But again, going back to fluent reading should sound like speech. And then remembering that the words correct per minute are the total words that are read in 1 minute correctly. So we're subtracting out any errors. And so looking at fourth grade, so we can see that the 75th percentile students by the spring would be reading about 160 words correct per minute. Then you have the 50th percentile where students would be reading about 133 words correct per minute. 25th percentile would be 105 words correct per minute. And then you have that 10th percentile where they'd be reading 83 or less words correct per minute. And remembering where Rebecca called out that they were below basic in that reading comprehension piece. So, research suggests that the 75th percentile is sufficient for optimizing comprehension, and the 50th percentile is necessary for comprehension. So you'll see that the 50th percentile row is great because that's where we need students to be at in order to be able to comprehend what they're reading. And above that would be able to optimize comprehension. So coming back to our fluency ramp and keeping in mind Jan Hasbrook's First, Foremost, Forever foundation of fluency, the fluency ramp. So we want to remember that accuracy of reading at the phoneme, letter, and word level should be the focus for beginning readers, but not rate. Until students are accurate readers, we cannot move to helping them read at an appropriate rate or to focus on their expression. So we really need them to be able to read with accuracy before we can move into these other pieces. But then at the heart of fluency is automaticity. So research established that fast and accurate word reading is a major driver of oral reading fluency. So sometimes there's this like back and forth between accuracy and rate. So sometimes students might have low accuracy, but a fast rate, thinking about them reading too quickly. They're not attending to those phoneme grapheme correspondences, reading words incorrectly. Sometimes students are reading so quick, they're not even aware of the errors that they're making. And then we also sometimes have students who have a really high accuracy, but they're reading a little bit slower. So they're really, really focused on making sure that they're reading those words correctly. They might be putting too much of that energy into reading correctly, and they might need some additional practice just to become more automatic and a little bit quicker. But I want us to think about or keep in mind that in either situation, comprehension can be compromised. You'll see that there's an asterisk next to can because it doesn't always compromise comprehension. Actually, as we were meeting and talking about this, we all had experiences of students who read at a slower rate, but were able to comprehend and answer anything you asked. And so we talked a lot about the fact that you have to look at students individually. And if it's not impacting their comprehension, rate might not be an area that we're spending a lot of time in. So we want to really be mindful of the students who need to pick up their rate or to be reading at an appropriate rate. Maybe it's even slowing down to be able to comprehend. But if we're seeing that students' comprehension isn't impacted, that might just be an area that we step back in. So thinking especially about our exceptional learners, kids who maybe just have a little bit of slower processing, like if their comprehension is good, we can leave it as it is.
So moving on to our final component of reading fluency, prosody, and remember suitable expression, so that tonal or rhythmic aspect of language. And Nate quoted, when students read a passage out loud with appropriate expression, they're using their ability to comprehend language as well as read the words in the passage. So right there is where we see that intertwinement of decoding and language. So I want y'all really quick to look at this next passage, this quote, I should say. This is from Steve Jobs' commencement speech. So read this silently to yourself. So even as you were reading it, you probably had some kind of tonal or rhythmic prosody in your mind as you were reading this. So look at these questions. For sake of time, we won't go through every single one to put in the chat. So thinking about the speaker's goal in the speech. So just that background of knowing this was a commencement speech. His goal probably was to, release these graduates with some words of wisdom, right? Some encouragement. Think about what were some of the things that you lowered your volume, you raised your volume. Where did you pause for emphasis? Like maybe in your own head, you were presenting this to students. Where did you pause to really hit the hammer on certain points? Now think about what if this was delivered in a way that conveyed sarcasm, right? This wasn't inspirational, uplifting. This was sarcastic. Your work is going to fill a large part of your life. The only way, all your words that you're saying, it's going to be so different in how you hit some of those words. That's you utilizing suitable expression based on what is the goal, what is the context of this text. So we know that prosody is tied to language. And we know that oral language is the foundation of reading and literacy. So, oral language is the foundation of expressive reading. So, thinking about speaking and listening, all those pauses, emphasis, our volume, the words that we're scooping together, that's how a message is conveyed. And that's going to impact that intent and that meaning. And then oral language is the foundation of reading. So the way that students read, think about how when you were reading that, the prosody you had in your own mind. So younger students especially need to be reading out loud. Let's move away the silent reading, drop everything and read silently for kinder and first graders, second graders even. They need to be reading out loud because that's how they're going to make meaning. They're connecting it to their spoken language, what we're naturally wired for. So that prosthetic reading and speaking, that improves our ability to make meaning. So let's have these kids reading out loud. If you want to know more about this, there's so much we could explore with language being the foundation of fluency. We have a really great webinar. It's called POSSUM, POSSUM, and it's by Laura Reinhardt. She comes from the University of California, great friend of the speech school. She did this webinar, take a picture or write it down, and she really goes deeper into the language components of the layers of language and how that impacts fluency. So we wanted to put that out there because there's no way we could go as deep in an hour and a half as we want to with this. So we wanted to share that resource as well. All right. So now let's look at the new K2 fluency standards. So I want you just to look at these. I want you to look at, you see K through 2. I want you to look at it row by row. I want you to indicate, where do you see the 3 components of fluency: accuracy, rate, and prosody? Where do you see those living in the new K2 fluency standards? And it's going to be, again, an answer for each row. And you can do row 1, type your answer. Row 2, type your answer. So put that in the chat. Or you can come off on mute too. If typing is a lot.
For row 1, there's an accuracy. Row 2, fluency. Row 3, prosody. Row 2 also includes rate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you. So we'll show the answers. So yep, that row 1, accuracy and rate. Row 2, rate. We see that there with increasing accuracy. Prosody with purpose, with understanding. And then, of course, accuracy in that last one too. Yep. Good job. So again, we not saying, these are all fluency standards. So it's each row is fluency, fluency, fluency. We're getting deeper with it. What component of fluency is this targeting? So when we have a disfluent reader, instead of just saying, if a student's not reading fluently, how do we work on fluency? We need to think about, well, what is the student's reading like? Is it inaccurate? Is the student's reading slow? Is it lacking expression? Are they non-prosodic as they read? So we want to think of fluency as a suitcase, right? You're not only going to, pack in a shirt and shoes, right? You need every single thing packed in there to really make sure you have what you need. So we have to have those 3 components. And if we don't have, or we're seeing scores that are lower in fluency, how can we go, again, you see that iceberg at the top, how do we go deeper and ask the right questions?
So now that we've done some learning or digging deeper into fluency, and I hope everybody has been able to have a few takeaways of learning something new or just reframing your thinking about fluency, I want you to think about this scenario. So, as an instructional leader, you observe a teacher conducting a fluency lesson as a component of their literacy block. The students are reading aloud at an increasingly fast pace. Their reading sounds unnatural, and when asked about what they read, they struggle to recall details or meaning. The focus appears to be solely on speed. So, as an instructional leader, what feedback would you provide the teacher with? And feel free to come off mute. We love hearing your voices, but you can also type in the chat, whatever works best for you. But just what is your feedback for this teacher?
So the first one, I really appreciate how they started by thanking them for their attention to fluency. However, the most important focus is for understanding. Let's talk about ways for that to guide your practice.
I love that.
Very comprehensive response where you give them some praise and some encouragement and some support as well. I'd start with ensuring that the teacher knows the meaning of feedback and connect it to read alouds that they're doing, kind of like what Rebecca mentioned about modeling how fluent reading should sound, and model each component and encourage the teacher to plan explicitly to introduce the components in an upcoming read aloud. You might say, I was glad to hear your students reading out loud in your class, although the students struggle to discuss what actually happened in the book. How can we increase or think about comprehension? That's what the chat's saying.
Awesome. We can move on to the next one then. Thank y'all for being vulnerable and sharing in the chat. So, thinking about the feedback that we provided the teacher, what are some next steps that we might recommend for this teacher? So, we know that maybe their focus has been on getting their students to read quickly. We know that students are missing maybe the comprehension piece. And so, specifically thinking about building their knowledge around fluency, what are next steps that you'd recommend for this teacher to do? Give a few more seconds in case anybody's still wrapping up in the chat.
The next steps might be to look at ORF rate goals for the grade level and discuss strategies for incorporating prosody.
I love that. I think one thing too, just for us to keep in mind, and I shared this at the beginning intentionally, is that teachers are doing what they think is best. Like no teacher wakes up and goes to work and is like, I'm going to do this because it's going to be like harmful for the students. So we just have to also be reminded that while we're here in this virtual room together doing this learning, our teachers might not have the same opportunity. And so we need to think about ways that we can help them learn more, because likely this teacher, I would imagine, has a misconception around what fluency is, and thinks that fluency is getting her students to read very quickly. So also just being mindful of like how we can build in ways to help build our teachers' knowledge too. I see that we also said I would ask to the teacher to include more think alouds for modeling, more question and answer. Once I was sure that the teacher understood what we currently mean by fluency and that he or she understood how to look for each component in students' oral reading, I would plan with the teacher how to give effective feedback for students. I love that. And that's kind of exactly what I was trying to communicate, is just being mindful that the teacher likely just has a misconception. And then I love that Amy said literacy leadership is an important component of this whole puzzle. So like thinking about ways that you guys are here learning and how do we give those little tidbits back to our teachers. And so we have one more question related to this scenario, but thinking about for you, what are your next steps as a leader? And we're going to reflect at the end, but if you want to put your next steps as a leader, like in real life, or even thinking about this scenario. So I've gone into one teacher's class and I've seen this example, like as a leader, what do I need to do next? Or what might I do next to see what else is going on in the building? I'll give people a little more time in case they're still typing.
Rebecca, I really loved your comment about for a leader understanding if it's trends in a grade level. There may have been a piece of professional learning that people just didn't quite get right. And so understanding those trends is really important.
Yeah, and that was to Aviva's comment. The first thing she started with was once I was sure that the teacher understood what we
Yes.
currently mean by fluency and that he or she understood how to look for each component. So that was my response was, yes, you started with the knowledge base, but also we know that capacity is sometimes time is always an issue in schools. So like it could be that one teacher, but let's look at all the grade level. Let's look at the school level. Do we all speak the same language of what fluency is? And I love how, Sarah, you said, we all have the opportunity to be in this webinar. A teacher may not have the time or capacity to also be in this webinar and learn. So how can we really make sure we can work smarter in getting this knowledge and practice out to people? And then it could be a PL or even you're working with your coach, a coaching opportunity of let's have a coaching cycle learning about fluency.
And
Yeah.
Rebecca, Jessica even built on that and thinking about Georgia as they're going through this legislative mandated professional development, but ensuring that they're actually engaging with it and truly understanding what it means in terms of how does this impact what I'm doing in the classroom.
Yes, that's so true because the legislation is a great first step, but we need to make sure that we're supporting teachers with that implementation. I see that Sharnita's hand is up, but I also wanted to call out what she wrote in the chat of that she thinks it's important to model for teachers and possibly use him or her as a teacher leader for that particular skill. And I love that because oftentimes that's our highest leverage is being able to coach into one teacher and have it catch on to other grade levels. So if you want to come off mute and ask your question or share your thoughts.
Good morning, Sarah, Rebecca, Amy, and Corey. Yeah, I was just going to elaborate on that. And I found that caught fire when I would go and model with the teacher. And I would model for the teacher. I would return and we would confer about it, whether I'd videotape. We talked about what I did well, what I could have tweaked. And I would work with that teacher maybe that week. And when went back and did another observation of them using that same skill, I would use them as the teacher leader. And when I tell you, they would talk about, oh, Dr. West came in our room and she did this, and it spread throughout the building. And then it also built that teacher's confidence. And that took some of the pressure off the instructional coaches and myself to do some other work. So, I found that was effective in my building when I was leading.
Yes. Thank you for sharing that because I think we're in lots of buildings, districts, state, or, across the state. And I think that's one of the highest leverage pieces that I always share with coaches is like, get in and find a teacher who's willing to work with you and use them to like spread the fire. I also wanted to read out a couple other things that I saw in the chat. Sorry, I'm taking over Corey's job unintentionally, but just Jessica saying that it's that if the fluency misconception is apparent in one classroom, that it's time to observe and see if other teachers are experiencing the same thing. And as Rebecca and I were talking through this scenario, that's exactly what we thought too, is like if one teacher has a misconception, I need to see how many other teachers have this misconception to determine, is it a spotty, like random teachers that I need to support? Is it full grade levels that I need to support? Or is it time to put a pause and support the whole school through a staff or professional learning situation at a staff meeting? And then Karen Wild says, using the incredible resources provided by Cox Campus. So I know at the beginning there was a couple of you who are newer to Cox Campus. There is a plethora of resources. And at the end, Corey's going to drop a document that has things linked, and most things are from Cox Campus. And then again, just thinking, are we consistent and pervasive in understanding instructional design and evidence-based resources? So lots of great things in the chat. I really appreciate you guys engaging.
And Sarah, can I just make one comment? One thing that has been needling kind of at my brain lately is because of the legislation and a lot of deadlines are in legislation. I have been worried that maybe in some cases we've just been trying to get teachers through the Georgia Literacy Academy. And so I especially think in going into this next year, it's going to be important sometimes to revisit those important concepts. And so just keep in mind that whether or not you've participated through the Cox Campus platform or if you've participated through the Georgia Learns platform, you can go in once you've complete, you still have access to the whole course to go in and pull little snippets as you're working with teachers in these coaching and just providing some additional professional learning. And so keep in mind that that resource is always there and you can always go back and pull little snippets for folks.
I love thinking about that too, because I think as you go through your learning in the courses, there are going to be things that, like even thinking about fluency, like we're drawing a lot of off of the phonics course. And so like as teachers are going through or as you're going through the modules, just being thoughtful about like when can I tie in previous learning to help teachers make those connections and help implement it in their classroom. Because sometimes when we're in the midst of the learning, it's a little overwhelming, but as we can start making those connections throughout our learning and opportunities, like that's going to be the most value. So next, we're going to move into resources. Rebecca's going to take us through a couple different activities.
Yeah, so we're going to zoom through these, but know that you're going to be provided these at a one-pager resource document sent to your email, and I think posted in the chat as well. So how do we integrate activities? So remember, we don't want an isolated fluency instruction. We don't want an isolated fluency block, but what are some integrated activities we can promote fluency with? And so we're going to start at the letter sound level. So again, fluency at all the different levels. So yes, kindergartners can develop fluency too if we start at letter sound level. Okay, so this first one, fluency grids. So fluency grids provides repeated exposures for letter and sounds. We often know what a roll and read is. This is basically the same thing, like similar as with the grid, but it's having the student say the letter name, letter sound, letter name, letter sound, and it keeps going. And that's going to help build that accuracy and automaticity. And again, like, I don't want to see a small group. Y'all don't say Rebecca told me to pull a small group for a fluency grid. No, I didn't. This can be a quick warm up. This could be a whole class warm up. This can be a really quick activity to end or to get anecdotal notes on an assessment on. So it's all about purposeful how we use these, but knowing that we want to build in these areas. So the next thing is prosody with punctuation. So letter naming. So again, quick warm up. This could be a quick fun activity. So A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, and I'll keep going on. So that's teaching children, punctuation. There's a little bit of grammar, but also teaching them to change their voice, that there's meaning with that punctuation, while also doing it at the letter level. And that can build confidence in students. This could be something that could be done with student partners as well. So I know kindergarten teachers often have a hard time thinking, what centers can I have? Like, what can I release them to? This is a great activity for that. All right, so now we're moving from sound letter level now to the word level. How can we promote fluency at this level? So again, we bring back the fluency grid. And so I love this too because you can differentiate it. We see the letter sound grids, and then you also see how intentional the words were chosen. Only like incorporating letters, building off from the scope and sequence. What have I taught them in so that I know they can be successful in this as well? So this provides that repeated exposure and interleaved practice. And again, we're building accuracy and rate, the heart of automaticity. All right, another activity, this is in our structured literacy table toolkit, is spin, say, write. So with this, you can do it with high frequency words. So I did not have spinners in my classroom. So what I did, teachers know how to ball on a budget, right? So I had a paper clip and a pencil, and I would just flick that, and the kids would flick that, and they loved it. So you can write in the spinner high frequency words, or again, letter sounds, other words, and then as they spin it, they say the word and they have to write it. So that's incorporating reading, speaking, reading, and writing all in one. And that's great for accuracy building. Another activity I think a lot of us are familiar with is roll and read. So this is a resource we can see from our friends at UFly. They have these for free on their website, and it is aligned to UFly scope and sequence. So please keep that in mind if you have a different scope and sequence. But the kids roll the dice and they read the word. I've seen lots of different ways that this is played, like roll and read bingo, battleship, even where each kid gets their own with like the folders. So you can look up and find lots of different ways. And remember, we don't want kids reading silently, especially young students, because if they're emerging readers, how do I know they're reading it correctly? So when they're doing this activity, make sure they're reading it out loud, maybe writing the words in a journal. You can enhance it, have them write sentences using the words that they get as well. All right, and this other one, how we can build prosody. Just like we had with punctuation with letter names and letter sounds, we can do that with words too. So we're building them up at the letter level. And then this is also helping their accuracy because they're seeing the same word, but they're getting to engage with it in a different way based on the punctuation.
All right, we're going to quickly move into the sentence level. And so one of the first strategies that we can use is syntactic phrasing, or often known as scooping. And this is actually an example that we pulled from a resource. And I want you to think about how these words are scooped together. So Jack be nimble Jack, be quick Jack, jumped over the candlestick. And so thinking about how this impacts meaning or understanding of what they're reading. And so we just wanted to call out that, like, with some of these strategies, specifically scooping or syntactic phrasing, is we want to be really mindful of how we're supporting students with scooping words and being very intentional. So let's look at a correct example of how we'd want to scoop this. So Jack be nimble, Jack be quick, Jack jumped over the candlestick. And so keeping in mind the syntactic meaning and the semantics of just making sure like that it goes in a way that makes sense and we're really supporting students' understanding, not just arbitrarily scooping words together. And so let's try this next one as a group. If people are bold enough to come off mute, I would absolutely love it. If not, maybe I can at least get Rebecca and Amy to come off mute. But we're going to do some phrasing practice together. So we'll scoop the word, then we'll read them together in meaningful chunks or phrases. Skip sits
In
the sun. Stop. Yep.
Dad said,
the dog,
the hog, and the hen sit in the big hut.
Perfect. A+ students. And obviously being virtual, it is a little bit harder to make sure that everyone is on the same page. But if you're doing that with a class, you could easily scoop with your hand or your finger and just get the students to read along, employing some structure or routines that you've set up with your class. So that would be phrasing practice. And then we also have practice with punctuation. So here we're working on all three pieces of fluency. We can be using decodable text and then using sentences that we know the students are able to decode, but putting different punctuation on the end. And then, like Rebecca modeled in the letter sound and the word level, just getting students the opportunity to practice with that punctuation on the end. So Sam is cooking dinner tonight. Sam is cooking dinner tonight. Sam is cooking dinner tonight. So giving them opportunities to practice what it would sound like with punctuation. And then we also have emphasis sentences. So again, this can be done using a decodable text or controlled text that we know students are able to decode. But emphasis sentences can be used to quickly practice repeated reading with appropriate expression by having students emphasize the highlighted word as they read each sentence. So they're repeating their reading of each sentence, but the emphasis as they read is on that red word that we see on the screen. So we want to make sure that we keep the content connected by selecting sentences from text that students are either currently reading or have recently read in the classroom. So it's not something that they've never seen before, but it's something that they have some familiarity with. And so then you could have them read it together like, I am not mad, said Brad. I am not mad, said Brad. So just giving them the opportunity to repeat, but with that different type of emphasis. And so I will skip this one as an example, but this is just another example that we could have done together using higher level text. And then we move into some strategies at the text level, are some ways that we can engage and support fluency at the text level. And so partner reading is a really great support for students because it provides lots of opportunities for practice. And then peers are able to support and provide feedback to each other, but also the teacher can go to the pairs and support that feedback. So it's typically motivating for students. They enjoy reading to each other. And then we just would want to keep in mind some specific structures are things to consider. And so if we're going to engage in partner reading, we want to make sure that students have routines. So again, we said partners and peers can provide feedback, but we have to teach them and explicitly show them how to provide meaningful feedback to their peers. So having those routines in place are going to be essential. Also keeping in mind that partner reading doesn't replace teacher-directed instruction. Like it never will, but it is a really great strategy. And then also being mindful about the text selection that we're asking partners to read together, especially for younger students. It needs to be decodable or controlled text that we know that they can read and practice individually. And it should be something that they've seen before, whether they've read it quarterly or just had an opportunity to practice it prior to reading with a partner. So it shouldn't be a cold read for partner reading. And then for older students, again, it needs to be something connected that they've seen before. We don't just want cold reading. Otherwise, it's not as beneficial. And then we might also induce some anxiety for our students. So with partner reading, another really important factor is making sure that we're being intentional about how we're partnering students together. So this is just an example of a class. You'll see on the left side that the students are ranked by reading proficiency. So we have Nakia at the top, Aiden at the bottom. And so as I'm pairing my students together, I want to make sure that I'm breaking the class in half and then I'm putting my most proficient reader with like my mid-proficient reader. So you'll see that we partnered Nakia and Destiny because Nakia is at the top of the top half of the class, and then Destiny is at the top of the bottom half of the class. And so we want to make sure that partners are paired together in a way that makes sense. Putting our highest and our lowest reader together doesn't make sense. We also don't want to put two lower proficient readers together because there's no support there. So again, partner reading is great, but just being super mindful and intentional about how we're putting those partners together. And here are the procedures that you could use or the different ideas. You could have partners choral read together. You could have them take turns. You can have the partner choose whether I'm going to read and you listen, or I want us to read together as partners. And then you can also do the ask then tell. So partners help with the self-monitoring. As partner one is reading, partner two is kind of monitoring the accuracy of the read. Can also do partner reading paragraph shrinking. So partner one reads for 5 minutes, partner two reads for 5 minutes, then partner one reads again. They start where their previous partner stopped and they continue that. But at the end of each paragraph, they're using that paragraph shrinking protocol from the PALS. It's used as intervention in a lot of schools. So that would just be another activity that you could have them do as partner reading. And then the paragraph shrinking here is just a quick rundown of the steps. So name the who or the what, tell the most important thing about the who or the what, and then say the main idea in 10 words or less. So that's what the partners would be doing at the end of each paragraph read. And then we also have repeated reading. So we preview or select the material, we review the goals and progress, we have students read, and we record for 1 minute, we provide feedback, we score and graph the data, we have them repeat those previous steps, and we monitor their progress. And then we have an example of what the graph or the progress monitoring might look like for students. So you can see at the bottom, it has the name of the passage and the dates that it was read. And then the students started in green, yellow, and red. So you can see that their accuracy went up with each repeated read. Another really great support is fluency phones or even using hands. So having students learn to cup their hand around their ear to their mouth so that they're able to hear the input from what they're reading. This is really helpful for students sometimes who just struggle or just need that immediate feedback actually in their ear to hear what they're reading. It sounds really simple, but it's a really great tool. You can also use PVC pipe to do this as well. And then one other piece is the decodable text protocol. So using a decodable text with repeated reads each time, making sure that we're highlighting those skill words, quarterly reading those skill words. Then the next day, the students read the words, but then also read the text quarterly, and then also moving it into partner reading, and then repeating those steps with another decodable text. So one of the things that we don't want to do is we don't want to do round robin reading. We don't want to do popcorn reading. And Rebecca talked about this earlier. We definitely don't want to be doing silent reading. So there's a really great article that will be linked in the one pager for alternatives to round robin and popcorn reading. We know this is a common practice, so we just want to give some opportunities or some things to replace it with. And so we are about out of time, but I do want to leave you with these questions. So just really reflecting on your high quality instructional materials. So thinking about what you have in your building or buildings, how does it provide support for fluency? Then thinking about what are your next steps as an instructional leader. So now you've hopefully gained some knowledge with us today. You know what's in the buildings, like what are you going to do when you leave here? And then what questions or thoughts are still circling for you around fluency? And so feel free to definitely put those in the chat. We can get to them and we can hang on for a few minutes afterwards, but I just want to be mindful of everyone else's time.
You can go back to the questions. That's will be our reflection, Toki. But yeah, we went through a lot of info. So this is kind of where our challenge for you is look at your high quality instructional materials now with the knowledge you have. And so definitely we'll be here if you have any additional questions. So Aviva, that's on Cox campus. If you look up Structured Literacy Table Toolkit in the resources, we are going to be sending with your email that'll come the certificate, like a follow-up email, like thanks for joining us. There's going to be a one-pager attached with all the activities we just went through will be there, and the Structured Literacy Toolkit will also be linked there, as well as that article on 11 alternatives to popcorn reading and a lot of other resources that we've explored during this session. So you'll get it on an email probably by next week.
And I actually can't, the Structured Literacy Toolkit might not be on the link that Corey just dropped. So we'll make sure to get it updated when it comes out with the email. If it's not included now, it will be included next week or whenever you get the link.
It's on there.
Is it? Okay, good. I couldn't remember.
I just wanted you to feel affirmed in that. I'm like, I know I saw it on there.
Thank you. And then I think, Toki, do we have a survey for them at the end?
So we'll include this scaling change too on the one pager, just for y'all to reflect on once you can process the information. But yes, please take our survey. We love hearing y'all's feedback.
And we appreciate y'all spending time on this Monday morning with us and being here to learn more.
And we'll stick on, once you'll complete the survey, we'll stick on if anyone has any additional questions or just wants to chat.
Hey guys, I just wanted to offer a shout out. Excuse me. I am teaching a class at the University of West Georgia. It's a read class where they're doing a tutoring session with students. And every time I have been in one of these sessions, I've immediately taken activities and ideas from you guys and used it in that class. So absolutely with my school system, but also with the new teachers. So thank you for all you're doing. So appreciate your work.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. That's awesome. Especially, I love hearing it used with teacher prep and training teachers. So you are doing the good work and you are preparing them well. So we thank you.
Thank you, Karen.
Y'all have a great day. Thanks so much. Bye bye.
You too. Have a good one. Thank y'all. Thank you, Aviva, and everyone. Yes, Abby. It'll be posted on YouTube.
And you'll get an email with the link and everything once it's available.
Mhm. You can find past sessions too from previous, like the one we did last month is already on YouTube. So you can find all other things there.
And Abby, if you just go to coxcampus.org and go to engage and pull down the year-long journeys, you'll find it under the leaders.
Yes. And there's tons of stuff on there that like even are not led by Rebecca and I. We have stuff from our Birth to Five team. So there's lots of good resources.
And be sure you share the also the teacher year-long journeys with your teachers. I put those in Right Now resources last week, just as a reminder. But there's several good webinars as part of that year-long journey too. It's good for leaders too, but also for teachers. I thought it was a good session today, y'all. I love how like chock full it was. Like I know that we had to kind of hurry at the end, but I thought it was great, and I thought we had great engagement from our audience.
I agree.
Thank y'all.
Of course.
Yeah.
Thank you. You have to start with the knowledge first, right? So
Yeah,
so that was our goal. Knowledge building.
that's right.
Okay. If no one has any other questions, we can hop off.
All right.
See y'all.
Bye. Bye, Amy.
Bye.